Hello, friends. Welcome to a bonus episode of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Thursday evening as I record this quickly. It's been a busy time in my life otherwise, day job things, NBA draft things, etc. But I want to give you another podcast, one more on this already busy week. And it's a crossover episode. I actually went on the Locked On Blazers podcast with Mike Richman. Mike is very smart about the Blazers, and we talked about John Collins. He asked me to come on and talk about the Collins rumblings. I won't use the word rumor just yet on the Collins number 7 overall pick kind of rumbling that's been out there, but there's some talk about that on this episode, and he sort of talks about all kinds of different angles about that, kind of what Collins is as a player in my mind, also what the value would be in a trade with Portland, what the Hawks might want back, what I would do in a situation, which I won't spoil just yet on this show, but sort of it's definitely the Blazers focus. It was hosted by Mike, but I was on that podcast, and it's not a bad idea to share it with you in crossover fashion. Please subscribe to the show on any platform that you'd like to listen to podcasts or watch podcasts. We have Apple Podcasts, of course, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube on the video side for sure. And also a reminder that we've had a very busy week on the show already. 5 episodes before this, including 2 on Wednesday into Thursday with Brian Schroeder of NBA Draft Acclaim. Brian is very smart. Talks about the draft for more than an hour with him. We had Glenn Willis on the show a couple times this week as well with some player capsules. NBA Draft stuff previously with Ricky O'Donnell and Ben Pfeiffer and Jake Rosen, up and down the roster of distinguished guests on this show in recent days. So it's been very busy, much more to come, at least 2, 3, maybe even 4 episodes between now and the NBA draft, which comes up next Thursday. And of course, we'll have a reaction to that as well. So wall-to-wall coverage, please subscribe. Right now, you'll hear the intro, and I'm back with Mike Richman and I talking about John Collins and a crossover event between the Hawks and the Blazers.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter, Mike Richman. You are listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Blazers your first listen every single day, free on all platforms, 5 days a week. And why not make your second listen Locked On Hawks, where you'll hear today's guest, Brad Rowland. Brad, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure, sir. Always happy to talk to you.
All right. Before we get into it, we're going to talk all about John Collins and trades and all that stuff. I want to remind my listeners that Locked On is partnering with Arcade 1UP to give away 3 free NBA JAM Shaq machines. Stay tuned later in the show to find out how to enter and what all that means, because it's fun. If you like NBA Jam, you're going to want to stick around. Brad, the reason we're here, the reason we joined each other today, you late at night in Atlanta, Georgia, and me in the afternoon, in the evening in Portland, is to talk about the trade rumors. There has been so much connecting the dots, from Mark Stein to Kevin O'Connor at The Ringer to Jake Fisher at Bleacher Report, connecting the Blazers and John Collins and the Atlanta Hawks. Let's just start macro. Why are the Hawks looking to trade John Collins?
It's really a great question. He seems to have been available for about 2 consecutive years
right
now. And quite honestly, I don't know why. I kind of know why, in that, he's a very, he's kind of a throwback player. Like, he's really good. Number one, he's really good. I want to say that out loud. John Collins is very good. He checks a lot of boxes that a lot of teams want, but he is, especially with the way that they are using him in Atlanta, I want to be clear about that as well. He is basically an old school power forward with how they're using him. And those guys don't always exist anymore. There's only a handful of those players that still are playing. In some spots, he might be able to play some center, but with the Hawks, they have 2 really good centers already on their roster. So they have not really used him a lot. And, without doing the whole backstory, they didn't want to pay him a ton of money, but they wanted to keep him around for the trade asset and all that fun stuff. So they paid him a decent amount. I think he's still on a decent contract, but it's never seemed like they were thrilled with the pairing of him and their centers. And I guess allocating money to a guy who, again, is kind of that old school power forward archetype. And a lot of teams don't really value that anymore. So it's a really interesting situation.
Are they just in a spot where, after they maybe overachieved one season and then underachieved the following season, where they just feel pressure to make moves? Is that kind of the situation they find themselves in?
It seems that way for sure. I think that they were pressured internally, externally, to kind of run it back after their great season. And I think, to a man, even publicly, it's been kind of striking locally and maybe even nationally how candid they have been from ownership on down about like how they shouldn't run it back. They've been very open about that. and they're like, this is a mistake and we're not going to do it again kind of thing. So it's like, there's definitely a tenor of, we are going to do something different. Like, that's what I've been saying on my podcast for a while, is like, I don't know what they're going to do, but it'll be different than last year. They're not going to run it back again. It's not happening. And it seems like Collins is like the most frequently discussed trade piece, but they're going to do something different. And there's definitely that pressure, that impetus to change it up. And it seems like he is the flashing target right now.
Yeah, he's the name. From your perspective, like, do they need to do this?
No, I don't think so. I mean, in a vacuum, you would never decide that John Collins and Clint Capella should play together. Right. That's the thing. I think it's actually worked pretty well. And without going crazy to the numbers, like, I think it's worked better. People realize that it's worked. But honestly, Collins has been the player they've asked to make the changes that other guys haven't had to make. Like, he's been the one that's had to change his game. He's had to become more of a role player in what they want to do. He's been a better defender now, which is actually helpful for his overall value, but he's picking and popping more than he used to. He's an elite pick and roll guy, but they have other guys in his way. They have guys in the dunker spot all the time. So I think archetypally, you could certainly say that, like, it's not a great fit, but he's also really good. And for me, they don't have to. Like, it's not going to offend me if they trade John Collins for a reasonable return. But if I'm in that building, I'm not going to be pounding the table that says we have to move John Collins. That's not where I am. I'm sure there are some Hawks fans that want that, and I'm sure there are people in the front office that might want that. If it was me, I would not be eager to do it.
Yeah, I mean, he's 24 and, like, good.
Exactly.
Good.
I'm with you.
So, like, I get it. And from the outside, it's like, well, they have to do something. And it seems like, getting rid of Cam Reddish was the first something that they did. There's this push between what do they do with Okongwu, who's like a really darn good backup center, and Capella. They maybe had too many players and they're waiting for a consolidation trade, but it doesn't necessarily seem like that's what they're angling for. And that's what I want to, or at least from the reporting. I don't know what Travis Schlenk is going to do, but at least from the reporting, they don't look like they're consolidating. They're more trading for more parts, more stuff. The Hawks, leaders in the East and stuff. They've got a lot of stuff. I want to talk about the package. I want to talk about the specifics of a Blazers trade package and what it might look like in the second segment. But before we do that, I want to tell our listeners about Built Bar. You know what I was snacking on earlier this week was a Rocky Road Built Bar. And I've talked a lot of game about Built Bar in the 2.5 years that Built Bar has been asking me to talk up Built Bar. Rocky Road might be the winner. It's just a wonderful flavor. I've been a peanut butter brownie guy, and this is that same sort of fudgy, chocolatey wonderfulness. Still packing a punch. 17 grams of protein. It's like a candy bar, except that it fuels you for your day. So if you do have to hop on a cross-continent conference call and make some audio content, what better way to do that with a Built Bar in your belly? So why don't you go to built.com right now? Check out the Rocky Road flavor, strong recommend, or whatever flavors you might find there. You'll find something for your palate because they got plenty to offer. And use the promo code LOCKED15. You'll get 15% off your next order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, let's keep talking about John Collins. I'm here with Brad Rowland of Locked On Hawks, or if you're listening on Locked On Hawks, I'm Mike Richman of Locked On Blazers, still chatting right here away. This is the crossover event of a lifetime. Everyone's been waiting for it. The rumored package that the Portland and the Hawks might end up agreeing to, or something similar to it, is something akin to the Blazers' number 7 overall pick, the Blazers' 36th pick in the NBA draft, for John Collins, and maybe 16. Let's start there. 7 and 36 for Collins and 16. One, it does not work legally, so they're going to have to add some more stuff to it to make it work. But let's start with that as a framework. How do you feel about that, Brad?
It's really interesting. I think that in a vacuum, Collins and 7 have pretty similar value in my mind. Now, you can find yourself on either side of that, depending on what you want to see. If you're high on Collins, you might think that's not enough for him. If you don't love this draft, if you are someone who is valuing the contract, and there is a lot of value in having 4 years of pretty cheap team control on a number 7 overall pick, I would say those guys are roughly equivalent. You can certainly go either way on that. If it gets into being Collins and 16 for 7, and 30, I actually value picks in the 30s by more than most, but in the
certainly more than the Hawks.
It's second round pick. Exactly. And the Hawks don't seem to care about second round picks really at all. So that's another thing. So yeah, I think that is in a vacuum a relatively appropriate trade package. I would not be running out of my seat to trade Collins, especially Collins plus for 7. But I think it's documented. I'm a little higher on Collins than the consensus. And I'm also a little bit confused, as I'm sure you probably are, about like what the Hawks are trying to do. Just because, you know, the number 7 overall pick it's a good pick. It's a valuable pick. I'm sure you've been talking about guys that the Blazers could draft with that pick for a while. But in this class, it's not like a sweet spot pick. I mean, it's not like a 7-player draft, and you're going to get one of those guys. It's like kind of a consensus fall off after 4 or 5. So it's like where do you want to land in the draft? And if you're the Hawks, that player isn't going to probably help you win this year. And there's some win now pressure. So, and also one of the curveballs that I've been saying on my podcast for a while is that I think the Hawks don't want to pay the tax. And they're saying the other thing, as most owners do, but it will smell a little bit to me if they turn John Collins and his $25 million-ish salary into a draft pick.
Into cheaper salary
into
slots.
Much cheaper salaries. So all that stuff, I'm not saying that's the reason, but that probably is a sweetener if you are ownership trying to avoid the luxury tax as well. So all that said, to answer your question in a long way, my apologies. It's an appropriate trade package. I would not be thrilled with that, especially for throwing in 16, but I do get it.
Do you think that's realistic from a Hawks perspective? Do you think that's something that they would do? Because it's like, what my question is, and I think you just kind of touched on it a little bit. What are they doing? Like, what are they doing? And why would this be other than the cash why would this make sense for them?
I think the optimistic reading, I'm good at presenting the other side.
I love it.
I think it would be that you kind of reset a little bit. You add another young player, another young cheap player with upside to your roster, and you kind of lay out your money long-term a little bit better because you don't have to pay that guy for 3 or 4 years.
Right.
Whereas Collins is already, and I think just to put this on the record, I think Collins is appropriately paid. I think it's a totally fine contract. He's making real money now.
For those listening, 23.5 million heading into this season, 25.3 in 23-24, then 26.6, and then a player option for 26.6. Starter money is like 20 million. He's probably an above average starter. That's above average starter money. Like that's you go.
Exactly what that is. Exactly. It's no longer a heist situation like he would be on a rookie deal. But I think that for people that haven't watched a lot and also don't realize that the cap is going to be rising, especially when you get to the later point of that, with a new TV deal, all that stuff, that might look like a pretty good contract by the end of it. Right. So anyway, I kind of see that as like a neutral value on the contract. He's a really good player. So it's, I think what you'd be doing is just number 1, changing something. Number 2, adding to your youth pipeline down the line. And also, maybe you have a plan for that number 7 overall pick. Maybe there's someone that you're absolutely in love with that, you can't get at 16, or maybe you have a plan to flip somebody else and you have a power forward, you have your eye on somewhere around the league. It's pretty interesting as to why they would do it, but I have to think, especially knowing Travis Schlenk, he's more of a scout GM than a process GM. He's one of those old school, like eye test scout guys. He must like somebody. Other than that, I don't see why you do this unless you have a guy or maybe 2 guys that you are like, all right, if those guys are there, we'll do this. And if not, we won't. Beyond that, I don't really understand like the process part of it.
Collins has been on the market for 2 years. Do him and Trae Young not like each other? Is that part of this?
It got a little bit out there. I think it was 2 years ago before they went on the run. There was a little bit of a reported spat, but like from all indications that I understand, they're fine. They may not be like best friends off the court, but I don't think that's a reason. They have really good chemistry on the court. I think a lot of that got overblown in the moment because they were losing, and it's just one of those like normal things that happens. But no, I mean, it's actually kind of refreshing to even hear about it. I haven't thought about that in a long time. I think they're fine. I really don't think that it wouldn't stun me if they weren't like best friends again, but that's not a reason to move him. I think more of the reason would be like, listen, John may not be thrilled with this new role either. That's the other part that gets under discussed is that he's the guy who's been sacrificing. Maybe he doesn't want to do that anymore. I don't know. That there might be some internal pressure from his side as well. He's not like demanded a trade or anything, but maybe he wouldn't mind that. They went through a long contract battle last summer, and sometimes there's bad blood from those two. So no, I think that's not a reason for it, even if they're probably not like super tight.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking along the lines of the Kristaps Porzingis trade, where I don't think him and Luka were pals, but I don't think they were enemies. But eventually, separating them kind of freed up the young, creative, offensive genius to do everything he wanted. And the Hawks certainly have one of those.
Yeah, I think it's better than that. I mean, there was a lot more reported friction between Luka and Kristaps, even if it wasn't like a full-on fight. Then Collins, I think Collins and Younger are in a better spot than that, from what I understand. But I understand the theory of it. Like maybe you just move on, and also just again the fit stuff, because ideally you wouldn't want John Collins next to a non-shooting center, and the Hawks have two of those.
Yeah. Also, can I say sorry for your listeners for bringing up Luka Doncic?
No, it's okay. Listen, for a long time, I couldn't even tweet about Luka because it doesn't matter. But no, it's actually cross my fingers. It's kind of cooled off. Like the venom isn't quite there. I think both sides are okay. Like Hawks fans love Trae Young, so they're okay with it now. And they don't hate Luka as much as they used to. As you well know, there was 2 years of just like a blood feud between the two.
Yeah, you had to mention them both.
You couldn't
if you mentioned one, you had to mention the other one for whatever. I mean, I know
now it's okay.
Reason.
I think.
Okay, good. I was worried that if this is your listeners catch wind of this podcast, which they might,
they'll be okay.
Yeah, at Mike G Rich on Twitter.
There you go.
Please be nice. I want to ask you about fit and stuff with the Blazers. Let's do that in the second segment. But first, let's talk about NBA Jam. You play NBA Jam, Brad? Have you played NBA Jam in your time?
Oh yeah, big NBA Jam guy. It's been a while, but I'm definitely in on that process.
Well, good news. It's back. And Arcade 1UP, the leader in home retro arcade games, is not only bringing back the best game ever, but they've made it bigger than ever with the Shaq Edition machine. Listen, if you are of a certain age, you've played a ton of NBA Jam, as Brad and I are. It's just the greatest arcade video game that there is. And now you could bring it into your home with the Shaq Edition. And here's how it works. Pre-order right now to get one of these machines, a real retro arcade gaming machine for your house at arcade1up.com. That's arcade, the number one, up.com. Estimated early September ship date. It's the place for fun, Arcade 1UP. Not only do they have the Shaq edition of NBA Jam, but they've got Golden Tee, they got Mortal Kombat, and a bunch of other retro games, all starting at $399. But it gets better because they're giving away an NBA Jam Shaq edition to a Locked On listener. And you can enter for a chance to win a game console for your home at arcade1up.com/lockedon. That's arcade, the number one, up.com/lockedon. You've got till July 8th to enter to win that NBA Jam Shaq edition console. Still a pass first point guard. Still Mike Richman. You are still listening to Locked On Blazers. We are still chatting with Brad Rowland of Locked On Hawks, and we're still talking all things John Collins, Demon Deacon legend for my ACC listeners. We've kind of touched on this a little bit, Brad. What is John Collins?
It's interesting. Especially if you go by like the public perception of him. And honestly, it was accurate early in his career. I would be the first to tell you that as a rookie or maybe a second year guy, he was a really bad defender in college. And he's really not anymore. Like he's not Draymond Green defensively, but he's totally fine. And I think if you just like don't watch the Hawks, and listen, they're not always on national TV. It's not like Blazers fans are dialing up the Hawks every night. And I totally get that.
Games start at 4:00. We're still at work.
I am here to tell you that John Collins is not a bad defender anymore. He used to be. Don't get me wrong. He used to be. He's not anymore. Again, he's not like a lockdown guy, but he's totally fine. He's got good like secondary stuff, like rim protection as a four. He's a big four. I mean, for modern fours, like he's got good size. He's a good rebounder at the four as well. And then offensively, like he's one of the 5 best pick and roll dive men in the league. I mean, just that role, he's really, really good at it. He hasn't had a chance to do it as much the last year and a half since they got Capella in there, but he's really a dynamic role guy. He could also shoot it a little bit, and that's allowed them to use him that way. And again, same thing, not an elite shooter, but a good shooter, like a high 33-point shooter on decent volume the last couple seasons. So yeah, he does a lot of things well. His passing's improved the last couple seasons. And it really is, as I'm saying it out loud, I'm reminded of this. He doesn't have a lot of weaknesses. Like he's not uber elite and anything other than being a dive man. His dive man stuff is truly elite, but he's just like pretty good at almost everything else. He's not like super flawed, other than he's just kind of a throwback player. But that's a good synopsis, I think, of what he is. If you have more questions, I'm happy to answer them. But that's the overarching situation with Collins.
Could he play center for 70 games in the NBA?
I think he could play center, but you would need a special kind of four next to him, I think, for the most part. I actually used to think he was going to be a center coming out and early.
Me too,
career.
To be honest.
Yeah, and I think that it would cost him a lot of pounding. He's just not that big. And the way that he plays, and one thing that you would love about him if the Blazers were to trade for him, he plays super hard. He's got a great motor. He always plays hard, but the miles will pile up on that a lot if he's playing full-time center, I think. And then defensively, as much as I think he's a pretty solid player, he's not an anchor defensively. He's not a primary rim protector that you would be in love with. If you had a great if you had a great four next to him defensively, I'll pick out the guy, whichever guy you want to choose.
Well, spoiler, the Blazers definitely don't have that.
Right.
But in any case.
Yeah, I think he can play the five, but I would be personally, if I'm looking into like ideal stuff for Collins or even how it would look in Portland, start him at the 4 and he can play 12 minutes at the 5, that kind of thing. Like he can play 5 for you in certain lineups for sure. I wouldn't be running out to start him full time at the 5 unless I had a great partner next to him.
If he were here, he would most likely play next to Yusuf Nurkic or whomever else occupies that spot, but Nurk probably.
Sure.
Something like 70% chance Nurk. What are his fit issues when he's played next to Clint Capella and Onyeka Okongwu? What are his fit issues with sort of like those traditional limited range 5s?
The biggest thing is that it doesn't let him do the best thing that he does, which is the dive stuff as much. But credit to him, and this is an underrated thing in my mind, he's made it work, and it's really been him making it work because he's become a really good pick and pop guy. He can make that shot. But limitation wise, he's not a great short roll passer. He's gotten better at that, but he's not a great if you just put him in the bucket alongside like modern NBA 4s, a lot of whom are really at converted 3s. He might be a below average ball handler and creator for that archetype, which can sort of hold you back a little bit. And honestly, in a vacuum, you wouldn't want him to stay at 3-point line all the time. Like he's had to do a lot of that, but that's not his best thing. So if you're playing him next to Nurk, for instance, Nurk's a good passer, as you know, but there's there's maybe some of that high-low stuff that's not been there with the Hawks that might like that a little bit more. But in general, the best way to use him is to have him with a runway to the rim, and that's kind of where Nurk lives. So that's a limitation, but he has made it work in Atlanta, so you at least have proof of concept there.
Yeah, I mean, really good pick and roll point guard and a center in his way is a very familiar spot for him.
He would be used to that. Yes,
he would fit right in. Let's just get down to it. You are Travis Slink or whatever. You're working in the office. You get the call from the Blazers, and it's 7:36, and Eric Bledsoe to make the money work. Eric Bledsoe on the last year of his deal. It's partially guaranteed, but I believe how it works is if he gets traded, it'll be fully guaranteed. But let's say that's your DeLon Wright. You got your new DeLon Wright. It's another long-armed backup point guard. 7, Eric Bledsoe, and 36 for John Collins and 16. Are you taking it?
I would not do that personally.
There you go.
Especially if I actually didn't check this, so I should have. If Bledsoe becomes guaranteed, it's even worse. Not that he's a terrible player, but that's a lot of money for Eric Bledsoe in a vacuum. Value wise, you wouldn't necessarily love that. And again, I'm a little higher on Collins than some, so that's just my opinion. Would the Hawks do that? I'm not sure. They might. I mean, there might be some urgency there for them to do that. Maybe they like Bledsoe as like the guy who can kind of what you said, fill that role for them and check that box and long term save a bunch of money. I was going to ask you, I think it's pretty obviously has to be Bledsoe for salary matching purposes. The dream, if you are just married to a Collins Blazers deal, would be to try to snag Josh Hart if you're the Hawks. As part of that move, obviously Josh Hart has real value. So I'm not saying that it would just be Josh Hart in place of Bledsoe, but if that's what candidly, I love Josh Hart. So that's part of my,
he's easy to root for. He's fun.
He's easy to root for. And the Hawks are looking for those two-way wing guys like everybody else is. That would be the way. My counter, if I was the Hawks in that situation, would be okay, what's the deal got to be to have it be 7 and Josh Hart? And maybe that's the construction is maybe the Hawks have to throw in something else and it's Collins 16 and something else for 7 and Josh Hart, that kind of thing. Because that's a question I have for you. What are the Blazers trying to do? Obviously, they probably want to keep Josh Hart because he's good. But that he's the only other guy, as you well know, on the roster that can probably match salary with. So it kind of has to be one of those two guys. They want it to be Bledsoe. I'm asking for Hart. It's one of those famous negotiation things. Yeah,
I think that's where the hang up is, right? Is that the Blazers, they have this salary match point guard that's Eric Bledsoe's not very good.
He's definitely at a minimum, he's not worth $19.3 million, whatever.
Yeah. And maybe it's, if the Hawks do want to get cheaper, it's a way that you could make it happen down the line, right? Is that you get out from under something like at least $50 million, if not $75 million owed to John Collins.
For sure.
That could be a motivator for them. But if they also want to be good, most teams are trying to accomplish twin goals, be as good as possible for as little money as possible. Shout out to the Warriors. Like it is, then maybe that's not the plan. But it's like, if you say, okay, Josh Hart, but you have to give up DeAndre Hunter, the Hawks are going to balk at that.
They're not going to do that. Yeah,
right.
No way
the Hawks,
do that.
It's like,
yeah,
or Bogey. Is it Bogey? Could you get Bogey and Collins? Probably not, right? Because Bogey's
don't think
good.
So. Yeah, right. And that's, I'm sure you've had the same conversations I've had with people on the Portland side that I've had with people on the Hawks side, and it's like, if you're eager, and that's what we don't know. Like, what is Travis Schlenk or Tony Ressler as the owners? Where's their eager level on getting on just doing this move, being in love with someone at 7, wanting to get off of Collins? If they're eager to do it, I could see it maybe happening, and I wouldn't love that construction, but it wouldn't stun me if that deal happened. For me, you have to treat Bledsoe like negative salary because that's what he is on that, and that makes the deal look worse. And you're throwing a 16 too. Like maybe the deal is Collins and something besides 16 for Bledsoe and 7. Because 16, well, like this is not a draft that I'm terribly excited about. That's still a good pick. I mean, it's a mid-first round pick that's got value to it. So maybe that's the spot that you tweak and you turn that into something else. The Hawks have a bunch of seconds. They have a future pick from Charlotte. Whatever you want to do, like there's a way to do that as well to kind of bridge the gap. Again, I'm probably the wrong guy if you want the answer of like, please trade me John Collins, because I like John Collins a lot, but I get it. I mean, there are people all over the place in Atlanta about this deal, and it kind of depends on your evaluation of John Collins at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think for me, it's the value here is hearing someone say, no, that package stinks, or that package doesn't entice me.
It doesn't stink. It doesn't. I mean, it really depends. For me, I'm probably lower on the value of 7 in this class too than other people are, because I like some guys that they can get at that spot. Like I'm a Dyson Daniels guy. I mean, AJ Griffin, if he's there, whatever it is.
What if Shaedon Sharpe fell there?
I don't even know if that helps me. Like,
right. Okay.
He's just he might be
the name that is kind of like the sexy. Okay, you've got this
for sure
high upside mystery man.
And it's not a sexy answer, but it's very possible, especially knowing Travis a little bit. Like he might have a guy that he wants, and this might be a discussion they're having at number 4 in the draft, and that guy goes at 5, and that's off the table now. Like we don't want to do the deal anymore if you're the Hawks, or I don't know. That might be the case, because for me, it's a vacuum thing. Like. Will this deal happen today? I kind of think not, because if you're the Hawks, don't you have to know who's going to be there at 7?
I agree. I think this pick happens at 5, right? Like at 4, 5, 6, you start to say, okay, if Daniels is there, if Keegan Murray is there, if AJ Griffin is there, whoever it might be,
whoever the guy is, yeah.
AJ Griffin kind of seems like a Hawks draft pick.
And candidly, if I put myself in the shoes of Travis, if there was one guy that I would want in that range, my guy would be Griffin, because he has the combination of upside and all things that you would want, former top prospect, et cetera.
Right.
Daniels would be the next guy for me, but I think Griffin would be the guy if I had to do this. Like, okay, one guy that I love, he would be the one for me, but I have no idea who Travis's guy is. It was reported the other day that it's Daniels from Jake Fisher.
Right.
I like Daniels, but he's a little bit interesting in terms of like, can he even shoot? Like you're trading for a guy who maybe can't shoot at 7 and like trade.
Needs the ball in his hands next to Trae Young. The thing is, Trey's going to make anybody good on offense. Like he's just going to drag him across the finish line because he's so darn good and creative, and he's just a wonderful passer. He gets you open because he's so darn good at it. So like they can get away with some non-shooters, but do you trade up to 7 to get someone who's a weird fit? I don't know. I think this whole thing it's a good exercise in kind of figuring out what each side wants. The sweetener the Blazers have is they have this 2025 Bucks pick that they got from CJ McCollum, from the McCollum trade. What a freaking win. What a windfall. You get the 2025 Milwaukee Bucks pick. Theoretically, that's the sweetener to push this over the top, right? Is that you say, okay, it's Bledsoe, but you get an extra first. The question is, do the Hawks want a 2025 first for their troubles, or do they want someone who can help in the more immediate future, because 2025 feels like a long way away for a team that's going to have to make a lot of decisions between now and then?
Yeah, I actually got an interesting email about this from a listener who was smart. It was actually a great email, but like one of the constructions was like, would the Hawks be trying to get Nas Little in the deal? And that's maybe a similar value to what you're saying about that future pick. I'm not saying he's exactly the same, but like a guy that they probably evaluated closely when he was a draft pick. Interesting, has had some flashes, and is that forward that everybody wants that can, be athletic and defend and all that stuff. So maybe it's something like that, or maybe it's Keon Johnson or whatever it is. Like maybe there's a sweetener.
The back half of the Blazers roster, it's Josh Hart and Nas.
That's kind of what I think too. He's the only
guy. And then
it's
like,
really.
Yeah, and then like then it gets there's a pretty steep drop off to Justice Winslow, but you never know.
Well, yeah, I was just thinking like even salary matching, you can't even get there. Like I was trying to do the math on like Winslow, Little, and something else. It's just not enough. Like there's not enough.
No, yeah, exactly.
It's Bledsoe, Hart, or bust. That's basically what
exactly. And I think that as we've kind of talked through here, Hawks are probably going to say no on just Bledsoe, and the Blazers are probably going to be wary of including Hart because he's their value here. And if you trade Hart and 7 and you end up with John Collins and Tari Eason or whatever, like, is your team better?
And ultimately, I'm sure you talk about it all the time when you're on your show, but like, what are the Blazers trying to do as part of this too? Like, I don't know.
They want to be good. They want to be good. Dame wants them to go for it, which is why they're targeting veterans with 7.
Exactly. And if you're doing that, you want to keep Josh Hart because Josh Hart's good and can help you win now.
He's a player who would be better on a good team than on a bad team. Sorry to the Lakers.
That is the interesting part about this whole thing is that you have one team that's trying to win now that has the 7th pick, which is not usually how that works.
Right.
And the Hawks are theoretically a win now team that would be making a non-win now move by doing this deal. It's very, very interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Last one. Does it happen? Yes or no? Just give me your prediction.
I kind of always say no to these things. Like
me too.
There's just too many. There's too many moving parts. Again, it should not surprise anyone if this kind of deal happens between these two teams. There's a lot of buzz about it, but I kind of, especially on a deal that I haven't heard directly on, it's like I'm going to default to no until it happens. That's just the nature of the beast. With how many you've seen it now with the way we're talking. There's just so many little things that can derail a deal that I kind of have to defer to no. But again, it wouldn't shock me.
My guess is whenever this stuff comes out like 10 days beforehand, it always falls apart because it's like, this is the early stages. Like if you hear about it 2 weeks before the draft and everybody's got it, 4 different newsbreakers got it. It's like the type of thing that's going to fall apart.
I said that on my show literally yesterday. I was like, listen, just as a reminder, most of the time deals that get out like this don't happen. Like they don't, especially when they're not being progressed. It's like the same rumor. It's not like it's like going piece by piece. A lot of these like long-term deals, it's like, okay, now this is part of the deal. Now this is part of the deal. This is just a construction. It's not like been reported as a full-on, this is the deal kind of rumor. It's still in the like hypothetical, we've discussed this kind of range. And usually those deals don't necessarily happen.
Yeah, unless it's Anthony Davis hijacking a franchise. Those are the ones that get different. Yeah, exactly. And John Collins not hijacking a franchise, just chilling, waiting to find a new team. Brad, thanks so much for hopping on. Or if you're listening on the Hawks feed, thanks for having me. It was a fun
welcome, Mike.
Fun chat. It was a fun chat. Dear listeners, if you're looking for me, Locked On Blazers is available wherever you get podcasts. So is Locked On Hawks. All platforms, on YouTube, 5 days a week, every single freaking weekday. And it's always free. So why not start your mornings listening to one of our shows and then make your second listen the other one? If you're a Blazers fan, listen to Locked On Blazers and then check out a Locked On Hawks to kind of get the inside on what Collins is. And if you're a Hawks fan, peep Locked On Blazers. We're rolling along every single weekday. Brad, thanks again for joining me.
My pleasure, sir. Thanks for having me.
Dear listeners, thanks. Talk to you soon.